How do you prepare for a conversation when the outcome feels risky? We talked about how a high stakes conversation is when something you care about feels like it's at risk. And the more that you care about something, the riskier it feels to have that conversation because you might lose it. So, how do you prepare for a conversation when something really important is on the line? And we talked about in that last video around the importance of getting clear on what your intention is and inviting somebody into that conversation, making sure that that invitation is something where the other person feels like it's going to serve them as well, like you guys are on the same team. And that's an important thing to include around the conversation that's incredibly important. However, there's another layer that I wanted to share here today that can really ensure that the trajectory of this conversation goes into the right direction. Because what we want to do when we have a conversation that has a lot of emotional intensity around it already is we want to name the things that are happening in your space so that they don't hijack the conversation and cause it to go in a direction that doesn't serve either one of you. And a framework that we can use in a position like this is something called desires, fears, and agreements. And what this does is it enables both parties to name what it is they're wanting from this conversation, to name the fears that they have around where this conversation could lead, and the agreements that they need to have in place to ensure that if things get a little volatile, that they know how to meet that moment. So here's how this could look in a real life scenario. Imagine if you have two business partners that have been building a business together, and one partner is just invested in the business constantly, and the other one is starting to become more and more absent. And that first partner is bringing it up to the other one, expressing how much they need that person to be around more and taking care of some of those responsibilities. And the other person just isn't quite showing up to the degree that the other person needs them to. And every time they bring it up, it starts to build this frustration and resentment towards each other to the point that the moment it's even mentioned, both of them get incredibly triggered. One wants to attack, and the other one wants to leave the room and retreat. Both of them are just firing that fight or flight response in their nervous system, and this conversation is going nowhere. Yet it's a critical conversation at this stage of their business and their relationship, and they need to have it. But they're at a place where doing it the way that they've been doing it is just continuing to make it worse. So the first partner extends the invitation to the second partner. Second partner agrees to have this conversation. They walk in, they're open, but they're also bracing, just waiting for that one little thing to be said to just set this thing off. And this is where a framework like desires, fears, and agreements can be incredibly powerful. So before they even begin the dialogue around the issues that they're having, they start with naming the things that could cause either one of them to feel hurt, to feel angry, or to completely just check out of this conversation. And it starts with desires. Both of them have a desire for what they're wanting out of this conversation. And that could sound something like, my desire is to have a conversation here where we stay grounded, that we listen to each other, and we come to an understanding of what each of us is experiencing in a way that we can create some solutions around the direction that we're wanting to take this business that feels good for the both of us. It can be my desire is to get rid of this tension that's being felt between you and I and get back to a place where we feel connected again like we did when we started this business. It can be my desire is to get really clear on our roles and responsibilities so that we can have some healthy expectations around the way that each of us show up here in the business in a way that makes sense for both of us. And so each person can go through what is the actual desire here? What do we really want out of this conversation? And it allows us to get out of the reactivity, to get out of the things that are frustrating us, the things that we want to project onto the other person, and get to the truth of what's underneath that. Because we don't actually want to project or create hurt in the other person. There's a deeper desire that's wanting to be felt in that moment, and this is our opportunity to name that. And then we can switch into the fears aspects. Well, what are you afraid of in this conversation? And that can sound something like, I'm afraid that we're going to continue arguing about this and we're going to get to a place where we just can't find a solution and that it's going to cost us the business and our relationship. I'm afraid that I'm going to get upset in this conversation and say or do something that's going to hurt you in some way, and then I'm going to regret it later. I'm afraid that we're just not going to be able to find a solution. I'm afraid that I'm going to lose my friend as part of this. And you can see how this allows some vulnerability to be expressed. When we can name our fears, it liberates us from the resistance and the contraction that that fear has on us when we can just say it out loud and bring it out into the open. And the other person can feel that too. And now we've expressed some deeper desires. We've expressed the fears that have been unnamed up until this point. And it starts to create this safety, this trust, this healthy vulnerability in the conversation where it just regulates the nervous system. It brings the walls down, it gets you into a grounded place, and it makes you very receptive to navigating this conversation. And then the third element that we want to have in place is agreements. In the in the case that this conversation goes sideways, do we want to have an agreement in place to ensure that, again, we don't say or do something that we're going to regret? And that can be an agreement that I'd like is that if I feel triggered around something and I say I need a couple minutes, that I can have a couple minutes to just breathe and calm myself down. I'd like to have an agreement where if one of us says something that's hurtful, that we take it back. I like to have an agreement that if we're unable to find a resolution in this conversation, that we set a day and a time to continue the conversation at the end of this one so that it's not just lingering in our space. And now you can set some set the container. You can set the agreements to ensure that there's a there's some safety nets set up in place in case anything happens along the way. And now you've created a container for a conversation that feels safe, that feels clear, and that will be much easier to navigate than it would have been. And then you can get into, following a structure for what that conversation would be, which is a conversation that you and I will have at a future date. But for now, it's about just setting everything up to ensure that we are being proactive and that we are prepared for the degree of conversation that we are about to enter. And if you have any questions around how any of this works, feel free to drop a comment or shoot me a DM on Instagram at Arvin_Anderson. I answer all my messages and I'm here to help you in any way that I can. Thanks for being here with me. I'll see you next time.